The Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce will now come to order. The chair will now recognize herself for 5 minutes for opening statements. So today's hearing is to discuss H.R. 1754, the Horse Racing Integrity Act. This bill is vital for the health of equine animals, jockeys, and horse racing itself. The protection of animals overall and horse racing and horses in particular is very important in my district. I hear my office has received literally thousands of letters in support of horse welfare in recent years. I was the proud owner of Thoroughbred, who actually never won at the track, but was always very good to me. There is an urgent and desperate need for this legislation. Last year, 38 horses died at Santa Anita Park alone. In the final race of the season, the horse Mongo groom died just 200 yards from the finish line. Earlier this month, 2 racehorses were euthanized on the same day at Harrah's, Louisiana Downs. Frankly, one death is too many, but the inexcusable fact is that we can do more to prevent these deaths. Patchwork oversight and spotty regulation means horses are often treated with drugs designed to enhance their performance without concern for their health. Jockeys face real danger as well. And we're so happy to have Hall of Fame jockey Chris McCarron, who is here today, because doped horses are more likely to fall and injure themselves. Riders risk serious injury as well. The lack of uniform regulation and supervision means state commissions allow parties to play by their own rules. Too often, they are at the expense of the horse. Horse racing is an historic sport, but it faces rapid decline if these problems persist. The continuation of avoidable racehorse deaths will erode confidence in every facet of this sport. So I want to yield the balance of my time to the sponsor of the legislation, and that is Congressman Paul Tonko.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you and Chairman Pallone and our friends across the aisle for hosting today's hearing, which is incredibly important to the future of this industry. I'm pleased that we're holding this hearing today to learn about the Horse Racing Integrity Act and how we can ensure that the sport of kings continues to thrive well into the future. This is an issue near and dear to my heart as I represent the nation's oldest track in operation, the Saratoga Racecourse, which has long been steeped in the storied tradition of this sport. Today, we find ourselves at an inflection point with regard to the future of horse racing. High-profile horse deaths at Santa Anita and around the country have tainted the sport in the eyes of the public and have called into question the future viability of horse racing in the United States. Those who love the sport are forced to choose between 2 paths as we move forward. The path of least resistance would be to do nothing. By ignoring the criticism and continuing with business as usual, we would be accepting a steady decline as the new normal. Tragedies would mount, and the sport would continue to lose credibility with the American public. Some states would likely take the drastic step of eliminating horse racing altogether. Alternatively, the horse racing industry could choose the more difficult path of action. This path of reform would require introspection and some disruption of the status quo for those in the industry, but at the end of the day, the sport would emerge stronger and poised for continued success in the decades to come. Today, we will take that first step on the path of action, and I thank our witnesses for adding their voices to this important conversation. By advancing the Horse Racing Integrity Act, and placing the majestic equine athletes front and center, we can truly capture the imagination of the nation, and the sport of horse racing can thrive and grow with time. Let's make 2020 a year of action and get the Horse Racing Integrity Act across the finish line. With that, I yield back, Madam Chair, the balance of my time.
And I yield back my time, and the chair now recognizes Ms. Rogers, the ranking member for the subcommittee, for her 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, and welcome everyone to the Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee legislative hearing. Today, we will focus on H.R. 1754, the Horse Racing Integrity Act of 2019. Horses hold an important place in our shared culture and history, and the industry contributes immensely to local communities across the country. This is a tough issue, and one that your industry is very passionate about. I appreciate the panel being here today to help us better understand H.R. 1754 and how it will impact the industry. I'd like to raise the majority's decision to prevent Representative Andy Barr from providing an opening statement. Last Congress, when the Republicans were in the majority, we held a hearing on this legislation. We extended both Mr. Barr and Mr. Tonko the courtesy of providing opening statements on their own member panel because of their leadership on the issue. During other legislative hearings as Congress, off-committee members have been afforded the opportunity to testify on the bills they're leading on. Unfortunately, that courtesy was not extended today. I'd like to use the remainder of my time to read the following statement prepared by Mr. Barr. Nothing is more synonymous with the Commonwealth of Kentucky than thoroughbred breeding and horse racing, which includes the horse capital of the world. Lexington, Kentucky is surrounded by more than 400 horse farms, and Keeneland hosts many notable races, including the Toyota Bluegrass Stakes and the Breeders' Cup, which will be held again at the racetrack this fall. With the privilege of representing this unique industry comes the responsibility of fighting for its future. However, this sport is not solely relevant to those states that are home to the Triple Crown races, like Kentucky, Maryland, and New York. Horse racing is very much a national sport. The horse industry contributes approximately $50 billion in direct economic impact to the United States economy and has the direct employment impact of nearly 1 million jobs, 988,394. Therefore, advocating for this industry requires more than celebrating its proud heritage. Currently regulated by 38 separate jurisdictions, the horse racing industry labors under a patchwork of conflicting and inconsistent state-based rules governing prohibited substances, lab accreditation, testing, and penalties for violations. This lack of uniformity has impeded interstate commerce, compromised the international competitiveness of the industry, and undermined public confidence in the integrity of the sport. The Horse Racing Integrity Act would remedy these problems by authorizing the creation of a non-governmental anti-doping authority governed by representatives of all major constituencies of the industry and responsible for implementing a national uniform medication program for the entire horse racing industry. A national uniform medication program is not about creating more bureaucracy or regulation. Rather, it is about streamlining the current regulatory structure to ensure the safety of our athletes. The most recent draft of the Horse Racing Integrity Act was developed through a highly deliberative and bipartisan process and takes into consideration a diversity of perspectives from all parts of the industry. The result is support from a majority of members of the House. We must build on the momentum in Congress and the industry as a whole to ensure the safety of our athletes and increase the popularity, public confidence, and international competitiveness of the sport. I'd like to offer Mr. Barr's full written statement for the record. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back, and now I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. New Jersey has always had a special relationship with horses. Our state symbol includes a head of a horse representing speed and strength, and our official state animal is the horse. It's a small state geographically, but surprisingly to some, the home of tens of thousands of horses. About a decade ago, the Rutgers Equine Science Center found that the horse industry in New Jersey was responsible for $1.1 billion in economic impact and generated about 13,000 jobs. And horse racing is also a popular sport across the United States. In 2016, there were more than 46,000 thoroughbred and quarter horse races and more than 38,000 harness races held throughout the nation. Wagers on thoroughbred races, a good indicator of the public interest in the sport, neared $12 billion in 2018, marking the fourth consecutive year of steady increases. More than 30% of U.S. households claim a horse enthusiast who watches or participates in horse events. And the success of the sport rides on the health of its star athletes, the horses and the jockeys. A recent wave of deaths at California's Santa Anita Park has put renewed focus on the dangers of the sport. Tragically, 56 horses suffered fatal injuries at the track between July of 2018 and November of last year, and 5 horses have already died at Santa Anita this year. And when a horse suffers a catastrophic injury, the jockey's health and welfare is also at stake. According to a study published in the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine, the most common cause of jockey falls is a catastrophic injury or sudden death of the horse, and over half of all falls result in jockey injuries. Today we'll be exploring ways to protect horses from injury and improve the general health of horses, from examining the effect of track conditions, reducing the risk of injury, and the best use of medications. We should also be able to agree that the welfare of the racehorses is of the utmost importance and that the sport should be safe. I'm committed to working with all stakeholders to promote the health and safety of horses and jockeys, and I know that the horse racing industry is continuing to actively work on proposals to further that aim. Now, thanks to the diverse panel of witnesses, we have a diverse panel today. I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm optimistic we can work together to build the consensus approach that protects horses, preserves the integrity of the sport, and maintains the level playing field. And I have to particularly welcome my friend Dennis Drazen, who's the chairman and CEO of Derby Development, which operates Monmouth Park Racetrack in my district. It's not just in my district, it's literally walking distance from my congressional office and from the home where I grew up. Monmouth Park dates back to 1870 and hosts thoroughbred racing, including the prestigious Haskell Invitational. I'm very proud to have the track in my district, and I have to say that I've known Dennis, and I knew his parents since I was a child. So thank you, Dennis, for being here and for all you do at Monmouth Park. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back, and I would like to remind all members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record. And now it's my pleasure to introduce and first thank all of the witnesses who are here. First, let me introduce Mr. Marty Irby, who is Executive Director of Animal Welfare Action. Next is Mr. Edward Martin, who is President and CEO of the Association of Racing Commissioners International, Inc. Next, we have Mr. William Lear, Jr., Vice Chair of the Jockey Club. Next, we have Dr. Catherine Anderson, who is an equine veterinarian. Next is Mr. Joseph DeFrancis, Chairman of the National, what is it? Horse racing. Does that say horse racing? Yep. Yes, okay, sorry. Dr. Joseph DeFrancis, Chairman of the National Horse Racing Advisory Council of the Humane Society of the United States. We welcome you. And finally, Mr. Christopher McCarran. Is that the last? No, it's not the last. Mr. McCarran, Hall of Fame jockey. And where's the last? There you are. Mr. Dennis Drazen. Am I saying that right? Yes. Okay. Mr. Dennis Drazen, who is Chair and CEO of Derby Development, which is the operator of Monmouth Park Racetrack. So I want to call your attention to the lights that are in front of you. Each of you will get 5 minutes. In front of you is a series of lights. The lights will initially be green at the start of your opening statement. Then there will be a yellow when you have 1 minute remaining. And finally, it will turn red, and at that point, we hope that you will be finishing. So I would recommend when it turns yellow, you start summarizing and ending your testimony. So we're going to begin with Mr. Irby, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the committee. I want to thank Chair Schakowsky and Ranking Member McMorris-Rogers and Chair Pallone for conducting this hearing, and thank Representatives Tonko and Barr for their leadership on the Horse Racing Integrity Act. My name is Marty Irby, and I'm the Executive Director of Animal Wellness Action in Washington, D.C. First, I want to underscore that we do not oppose horse racing. We join with many horse owners, breeders, and trainers in speaking out on the broader topic of horse protection within the equine industry. We are deeply concerned about on- and off-track risks and for horses, including catastrophic injuries sustained during racing. America was built on the backs of horses, and they have always played a central role in the economy and culture of the United States. We owe them a debt of gratitude, and the very least we must do is ensure their safety and protection. Horses are dying at alarming rates on racetracks across the U.S., posing a serious welfare problem. 2019 was a tragic year in U.S. horse racing, and 2020 has begun in quite the same vein. This epidemic has gained nationwide attention and concern, and 42 horses have died at Santa Anita Park in California since December of 2018. The rampant doping, along with the absence of a national regulatory body, pose unacceptable health risks to horses. Horses that need to be trained or raced under the influence of any performance-enhancing or pain-masking drug should not be doing so and should be resting instead. As a lifelong horseman, I have spent the vast majority of my life in the presence of horses and most of the past decade working to protect them. I understand their biology, their social characteristics, behaviors, and instincts, and I believe that horses are born to run. Equine behavior is best understood from the view that they, as prey animals, horses are uniquely sensitive, and their first reaction to a threat is often to flee. But humans domesticated horses thousands of years ago, and more athletic breeds were selected for traits such as speed, agility, alertness, and endurance, building on natural qualities from their wild ancestors. These are the same traits carried today by the horses we see in racing competition, traits that predispose them to inherent vulnerabilities when overworked, resulting in painful and often permanent injuries. Simply masking pain or for injury for benefit for human exploitation and capital gain has created an equine welfare crisis within the racing community and public domain alike. For the past 5 years, I have worked in concert with the Coalition for Horse Racing Integrity to advance the Horse Racing Integrity Act in order to bring a higher standard of care and safety for the horses and save equine lives. Today, horse racing operates under a balkanized patchwork of rules that creates confusion and risk and contains gaps in enforcement. H.R. 1754 would greatly improve regulatory standards, ban the use of all medications on race day, and level the playing field for everyone invested in horse racing. The bill designates the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency as the independent organization that would oversee and administer drug testing in U.S. horse racing. Delegating that authority for testing, oversight, and rulemaking to USADA is the cornerstone of this landmark legislation and a provision that is the most critical component for the protection of racehorses, along with the legislation's specific ban on race day medication. H.R. 1754 would provide USADA with the ability to impose penalties for cheating that apply nationwide, a lifetime ban for the most severe types of doping, and range of penalties for other serious medication violations. Imagine if all 32 professional football stadiums in the U.S. had its own set of rules with variations from stadium to stadium. Well, that's the scenario that U.S. horse racing currently operates within. And if NFL players choose to dope themselves and take drugs, they are the ones who have made that decision. Unlike human athletes, horses have no voice and they have no choice. And that is why we are here today and why we must ensure they are properly protected. The public sentiment is rapidly shifting from a desire to end doping concerns about the very existence of the sport itself. Even Ferdinand, the winner of the 1986 Kentucky Derby, fell victim to the predatory industry of horse slaughter. If one of the nation's most popular horses is prodded into a kill chute, then no horse is safe, and it is vitally important for the protection of American racehorses that the full committee also advance H.R. 961, the Safeguard American Food Exports Act, led by Chair Schakowsky, that is set to be heard tomorrow before the Health Subcommittee. The inability of the horse industry to better protect its equine and human athletes underscores the need for the Horse Racing Integrity Act to pass this year. If Congress fails to pass the act and the obstructionists within the industry continue to hinder this legislation, then we may very well see those who demand horse racing be brought to an end prevail. Our modern-day society will no longer tolerate abuse and horse deaths for the purposes of entertainment. This is not ancient Rome, this is 2020. There is no aspect of horse racing that should be more important than the protection, safety, and care of the horse. I ask that the Horse Racing Integrity Act be advanced to the House floor for a vote and thank the chair and members for their support on this issue. The way in which we treat the most vulnerable among us is a reflection of our character as a nation and a society. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for keeping to the time. Mr. Martin, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Schakowsky, Ranking Member Rogers, and esteemed members of the subcommittee. For 85 years, the Association of Racing Commissioners International has put forth policies to ensure the safety of horses and an honest, fair race. We wear the white hats, and we are on the front line. Sometimes people listen, sometimes not. Thank you for listening. The bill before you is focused on integrity and uniformity. We cannot support it for a variety of reasons, mostly because it does not address the real problem. The biggest problem in horse racing is dead horses. And while state regulatory changes have helped, more needs to be done by everybody. At-risk horses must be kept off the track, and this cannot be done without identifying and monitoring them throughout their racing career. Efforts underway in the Mid-Atlantic states are helping, but statutory limitations stand in the way of what should be happening everywhere. The regulatory framework has a gaping hole: horses that are not under the jurisdiction of a state commission. That must be closed, either by government or by an NGO. The existing breed registries, like the Jockey Club, are uniquely positioned as every state requires racehorses be registered with them. They can be the NGO authorities regulating the care, breeding, and management of horses before being entered in a race or brought to the track. That's the point at which they come under the jurisdiction of the states. As guardians of their breeds, it is not inconsistent for them to impose requirements to protect the health of these horses so that they are suitable to race. Last summer, the ARCI board appealed to the Jockey Club to require the submission of all vet records, including medical diagnosis, treatments, and procedures so their technology can identify horses in need of increased monitoring. We also proposed out-of-competition equine suitability testing and exams to red flag horses so a track or regulatory vet would have the entire picture to determine whether the horse should be allowed to race. Somebody needs to do this who has extensive equine welfare expertise, not the entity proposed in the bill. Congress can designate an agency or NGO to be empowered and require the registration to do this if the breed registries opt not to do this under the existing position, special position they currently have uniformly in every racing state. Every day this is not done, another horse is potentially at risk. The deaths in California underscore the crisis. Immediate and sweeping action is needed. It's not about the drugs. It's about what is going on with that horse and why they are being treated. You're not going to get to that by changing a drug rule here or who gets to make the doping rules there. That's why we believe this bill is inadequate. An independent system to make rules, enforce them, and hear cases is already in place. You don't need to create a new one. You can achieve uniformity without creating a new bureaucracy by putting one sentence in statute to incorporate the ARCI model rules of racing by reference. As to integrity, doping, and cheating, this is a concern of all sports. Some say our labs are not good, others say they're too good because we detect minute levels of things in the environment. Well, you can't have it both ways. Our lab results are comparable with those of the WADA and USADA labs in human sport. Does that mean the labs catch everything? No. Lance Armstrong got past the WADA-USADA labs over 300 times before an informant pointed the way. Cheaters exist. This bill's not going to change that. Please know that we are never satisfied and continually strive to do better, as the New York lab again proved last week when it was the first in equine or human sport worldwide to identify and confirm the use of an exotic blood and gene doping agent, IOX2. Finally, on Lasix. We do not believe equine medication policy should be politicized. Current policy was an industry welfare initiative over 30 years ago to safeguard horses from a condition known as EIPH. It helps the horses that need it and doesn't hurt the horses that don't. This issue is again under review. Last spring, our science advisors were unanimous in reporting that there is nothing linking Lasix to the breakdowns that are killing horses. Time spent on this is time that we are not spending on solving the real problem and developing a bill to close the regulatory gap I've mentioned. You can fix this, and we are here to help you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Now I recognize Mr. Lear for his 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Chair Schakowsky, Chairman Pallone, Congresswoman McMorris-Rogers, members of the committee, Mr. Tonko, Mr. Barr, my own congressman, whom I have known for many, many years. My name is Bill Lear. I'm vice chairman of the Jockey Club, and I'm a trustee of Keeneland Racetrack. The goals of the Horse Racing Integrity Act are simple and straightforward. We want the cleanest possible sport, we want the safest possible sport, and we want an even playing field. To do that, we have to fix our medication regulation system, and we know that, and we've known that for some time, and we have tried to do that within our own industry. Federal legislation was not our choice of first resort. We tried with a compact. It failed. My own state, Kentucky, did pass it. Nobody else passed it. They're trying again with another compact, and it is flawed with some provisions that ultimately, in my view, will prevent it from being effective. So where are we with our current system? 4 years ago, in response to a statement made by Mr. Martin, who is an eloquent custodian of the status quo, I take a lot of pride in sitting next to him, but he does represent the status quo. I asked these questions about our current system. I said, do we have the same medication rules in place in every jurisdiction in the United States or even in all the major racing states? The answer to that then, as it is now, is no, and you've received a lot of information from researchers about that fact. Do we have the same testing rules and procedures in place everywhere, including best out of competition testing practices? And frankly, that's the way you catch cheaters. And the answer to that is no. Do we have the same procedures and standards in place for labs? And almost as important, the same contractual terms with labs so that you're paying the same price everywhere? Because frankly, some of them do it on the cheap. And the answer is no, and they are also not, except for one lab in the United States, certified, accredited to the same levels as the best labs around the world. Do we have the same processes for investigation, the same number of investigators around the country, and the same adjudication processes? No, we don't. Do we have the same system of penalties, and is there consistency in the application of those penalties, meaning does the same offense in California result in the same penalty there as in Kentucky, as in Florida, as in New York? No. And do we have a system in place that can react quickly and uniformly around the nation to address the latest drug problem that arises? Passage of this bill would address all those deficiencies by combining the world's best, the gold standard for anti-doping in the world, USADA, with state regulators, trainers, tracks, vets, jockeys, owners and breeders, both on the board of this private self-regulatory organization and in the committees, the standing committees that support its work. The legislation provides due process guarantees to everybody in rules promulgation and adjudications, the ability to react quickly, forcefully, and nationwide, an avenue for partnering with state regulators to plug into their system by contract, but all with the same processes, protocols, and rules. And most importantly, it's founded on the proposition that the regulatory authority should be controlled by independent persons with no conflicts of interest. No case better illustrates that point than what happened with the Triple Crown winner Justify, who had a positive drug test in the race in which he qualified for the Kentucky Derby that was later dismissed behind closed doors by the California Horse Racing Board. Thus, even one of the greatest achievements in modern racing was given a black eye by our current system. This bill represents true reform. That's why it's supported by key industry organizations, by jockeys, by many, many trainers and others, and animal welfare organizations. Many people in our industry believe that they are staring at the abyss, that we have to do something and have to do something now, and this bill represents the best path forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Dr. Anderson, you are welcome to take your 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Schakowsky, Ranking Member McMorris Rogers, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the horse. My name is Dr. Kathleen Anderson, and I am an equine veterinarian who has practiced with thoroughbred racehorses for 34 years. For the past 27 years, I have owned and operated an equine veterinary practice based at the Fair Hill Training Center in Cecil County, Maryland, approximately 2 hours north of where we sit today. I am licensed in 9 states and hold Racing Commission licenses in 3 states. I share this information with you today to make the point that I am engaged daily in the care of the thoroughbred racehorse in training and competition, and often throughout their second careers in other equestrian endeavors. How is this relevant to the legislation we are here to discuss today? As a volunteer who has served thousands of hours with equine industry groups beyond my daily practice, I am committed to be a voice for the horses I care for, the thoroughbred racehorse. The health, welfare, and safety of the racehorse is my primary guiding mission as a veterinarian, as a citizen of the equine community, and as a leader within the racing community. Specific to this legislation, I served as the 2016 president of the American Association of Equine Practitioners. I continue to serve on the AAEP Racing Committee, which has been actively monitoring and evaluating this legislation. I am a co-author of the Mid-Atlantic Strategic Plan to reduce racing fatalities, and recently I endorsed the Thoroughbred Safety Coalition reforms at their inaugural announcement last fall. I tell you this to demonstrate that I am familiar with the intricacies and impacts of this legislation. I strongly support seeking and implementing solutions to racing industry challenges. The Jockey Club is to be commended on their commitment to the welfare of the thoroughbreds during and after their racing careers, as evidenced by the many initiatives they have supported. The equine veterinarian's role is to bring expertise, knowledge, and commitment to racing industry initiatives directly impacting the horse. Uniformity, we can all agree, should be the holy grail of our efforts, for it is the glue that will bind all racing jurisdictions together with cohesive policies, not just on medication, such as this bill seeks to achieve, but on all matters impacting risk management of the racehorse. Uniform medication rules, enforcement and penalties, uniform laboratory testing, accreditation and interpretation, uniform regulatory veterinary duties, uniform track surface requirements, racing office policy, and crop rules, uniform injury response, records and investigations. Many of these are included in the Mid-Atlantic Strategic Plan, which is an example of the work being done by collaborative racing stakeholders to fulfill the mandate of safety and welfare of the racehorse, while simultaneously ensuring the integrity and level playing field within our American racing environment. As a practicing veterinarian, I do have concerns that eliminating furosemide, the only allowed race day medication, will not improve the safety and welfare of the racehorse. There is substantial documented science behind the safe and efficacious use of furosemide to prevent exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, a respiratory condition common in elite athletes, including human athletes. EIPH can adversely impact racehorses not only in their current careers, but also in their second careers. Studies done in the 1980s in Hong Kong by an international team of veterinarians examined the lungs on deceased racehorses to document the damage of the lung tissue of horses with EIPH. This provided strong physical evidence supporting the decision made 40 years ago to allow the administration of furosemide on race day based on what was best for the health of the racehorse. In my opinion, this bill could be improved with significant changes in the governance structure to include expanded veterinary expertise in several areas, such as veterinary pharmacology and extensive experience in veterinary racetrack practice. The real need for uniformity expands beyond doping and medication. I believe the solutions lie in a unified racing stakeholder effort, such as we have implemented in the Mid-Atlantic with strong, multifaceted reforms. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. And now, Mr. DeFrancis, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Schakowsky, and good morning. Good morning, Ranking Member Rogers, Chairman Pallone, members of the committee. My name is Joe DeFrancis, and it is a distinct privilege and a genuine pleasure to be with you this morning to discuss a matter of the utmost importance, not just to me personally, but to the industry that I love very, very dearly. And I want to thank you sincerely for the opportunity to be here today. I'm here wearing multiple hats. As Chair Schakowsky mentioned in introduction, I'm very proud to be the National Chairman of the Horse Racing Advisory Council of the Humane Society of the United States, and in that capacity to speak on behalf of the animal welfare community. I was also the controlling shareholder and majority owner and chief executive officer of the Maryland Jockey Club for about 2 decades. The Maryland Jockey Club is the corporate parent entity of Pimlico Racecourse, the home of the Preakness, the middle jewel of horse racing's Triple Crown, as well as Laurel Park, which is the closest major thoroughbred track to where we're sitting this morning in our nation's capital. And so I also bring a businessman's perspective to this issue. Focusing on the animal welfare perspective, I think the moral and ethical imperatives are so self-evident that I don't need to take the subcommittee's time this morning to belabor them. I'd just like to simply observe and echo the comments of my colleague, Mr. Irby, that while human athletes have a choice, human athletes have free will and can choose to endanger their health and welfare and safety to take performance-enhancing or pain-killing drugs. Horses have no choice. They have no free will. They are completely dependent for their health, safety, and welfare on the ethics and the morals of the people who care for them. From a business perspective, it may seem rather strange to some of you that we as business people are here asking you, taking your time, to impose a new framework of federal regulation on our business. I would imagine that doesn't happen very often, and it might appear kind of crazy to some of you, but I can assure you there is a method to our madness. Horse racing is unique in that it has no commissioner. We have no national office. There is, unlike football, baseball, basketball, hockey, there's no Roger Goodell or Pete Rozelle. There's no Gary Bettman, Adam Silver, or David Stern. It's not that we don't want one. We have been trying for decades to have one. My colleague, Mr. Drazen, writes passionately in his prepared testimony how he's been working for 20 years to support a national office who is empowered, and those are the key words, who is empowered to regulate the business on a national basis. The problem is, because horse racing involves wagering, it has been pervasively regulated. Every aspect has been pervasively regulated on a state basis since horse racing's inception. This pervasive state regulation prevents us as private business people from voluntarily entering into any type of national coalition or national compact to empower one national office to set national rules that all the participants in the sport must abide by. We can't solve this problem by ourselves. We have been trying for decades. Every initiative has failed miserably. The pervasive state regulation works well in many aspects of the sport, but I don't think anyone can disagree that it has failed miserably when it comes to the critical issue of drugs and medications. Why is this so important to the business? Horse racing faces greater competition than ever before for the entertainment dollar. The proliferation of technology and forms of entertainment and wagering is exploding before our very eyes. Our greatest asset, our greatest weapon in this competition is the athleticism and nobility and majesty of the thoroughbred racehorse. Survey after survey after survey has shown that not only the general public, but our core fans are losing confidence to an increasing degree in our stewardship of the integrity of the sport and the fundamental integrity of our product, that we are doing our jobs properly and looking after the health and welfare and safety of these magnificent equine athletes that are the very foundation of our sport. You don't need a PhD from a top 10 business school to know that if you lose the confidence not only of the general public, but of your core customers in the basic product that you're offering, the invisible hand of the marketplace is going to drive your business into oblivion. You won't need to worry about remedies. The marketplace will take care of it, and you'll be out of business, just as many businesses like Ringling Brothers Circus that fail to follow this principle of Business 101 have suffered. So it is not an over-dramatization. It is not an over-sensationalizing to say that the very future of the industry, the survival of the business, is at stake. As someone who has been a passionate fan of this sport since I was 5 years old, a time span now, Chair Schakowsky, I'm sorry to say, extends over 6 decades, I really, really would respectfully request, in fact, I would implore you to report favorably on H.R. 1754 at the earliest possible time. I thank you very much for your time and attention this morning, and I really welcome the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeFrancis. And now, Mr. McCarron, we welcome your testimony for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair.
Put your mic on. There we go.
Oh, sorry about that.
There you go.
All right, good morning, and thank you, Chair Sikowski and Ranking Member Rogers and members of the committee for inviting me here today. My name is Chris McCarron. I was a professional thoroughbred jockey for 28 years. From 1974 through 2002. I won 7,141 races from over 34,000 mounts. And when I retired, I was the leading money earner in the sport's history. I won 6 Triple Crown races, including 2 Kentucky Derbies, 9 Breeders' Cup races, 5 coming in the Classic. I was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1989 during my first year of eligibility. I am also a founding member of the Humane Society of the United States National Horse Racing Advisory Council. I joined that council because I believe in the organization's animal welfare mission. The humane movement in American history was built around the protection of horses, and we have a deep responsibility to them. That's why I'm here today. I support H.R. 1754 because horse racing as a sport has been in serious decline for years, and something must be done to curb this trend. I believe one of the reasons for this decline is the lack of public confidence in our product. Over the past few decades, medication violations, by this I mean horses testing positive for banned substances and non-banned substances in excess of permitted amounts, have escalated to the point of being unacceptable to our patrons and participants alike. When I began my career right here in Maryland in 1974, the average number of annual starts for a horse was 14. Today, the average number of career starts is 11. This stat alone has caused many of our horse owners to leave the sport and countless others to lose interest in becoming an owner. Racing simply cannot withstand this serious decline. Why would anyone, knowing these stats, want to become involved in racehorse ownership? Further, there are far too many horses suffering an injury to the point where their careers come to an early end. To borrow and adapt an old adage, medications don't kill horses. Improper use of medications kills horses. Instead of giving the horse the rest it needs, a trainer relies on his or her veterinarian to administer a medication to mask pain by reducing inflammation caused by an injury. I can tell you this for sure. Horses' careers would last much longer if this practice was less prevalent. I should also say that I have a personal interest in seeing this bill passed. Far too many of my brethren, the active jockeys and exercise riders plying their trade on a daily basis, are being injured due to horses breaking down during racing or training. Several years ago, the Journal of American Medical Association conducted a study that revealed 31 jockeys experienced 31 accidents per week. To be clear, this is a very dangerous occupation. More to the point, it's been reported to me by the Jockeys Guild that on average, 2 jockeys die each year and 2 more are left paralyzed. Furthermore, there are currently over 60 permanently disabled jockeys in the United States. The majority of these tragedies occur due to horses breaking down. Very often, these horses are racing with pre-existing conditions that have been masked by medication. I can also tell you this. While riding, it is a truly helpless feeling, Madam Chair, that when a horse breaks down, it's a tragedy. If a jockey is lucky enough to survive the fall, the sorrow felt for the fate of the horse is the next weight to bear. when jockeys get on the horses, they aren't told the medical history. They aren't told whether the horses are completely sound. They aren't told whether a particular horse should be resting rather than racing. That is why I strongly support the Horse Racing Integrity Act. This bill directly addresses one of the leading causes of breakdown. Right now, there are almost no controls on what therapeutics horses are giving while training. A substantial number of breakdowns happen on the training track in the mornings. This bill would significantly expand out-of-competition testing, which is below 5% of all tests for horses right now. By comparison, 60% of all tests of Olympic athletes are out of competition. There is something really wrong here, and I'll tell you what it is. The status quo, with 38 different states governing one industry, with 38 different sets of rules and penalties, and numerous different laboratories doing the testing using different standards, is just not working. It simply cannot go on if thoroughbred racing is to continue to be a viable industry. Our racing industry provides over $15 billion annually to the American economy, while supporting nearly 250,000 jobs. That concerns me. Something must be done to stem the tide and stabilize an industry that is so vital to communities across the country. I sincerely hope that you give H.R. 1754 the thumbs up and help the thoroughbred industry right this ship. It's sinking, and we truly need your help. Thank you for inviting me to testify today.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Drazen, you are welcome to give your 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Schakowsky, Congresswoman Rogers, Chairman Pallone, members of the committee, Congressman Tonko. Thank you for your work on this. Unfortunately, I am opposed to H.R. 1754, and I want to explain why. I come from a background in horse racing, in addition to the other hats that I wear. I've owned horses, raised horses, bred horses, worked for the horsemen's associations, been their counsel, been their legislative counsel, been their president, ended up as chairman of the Racing Commission, served on a number of blue ribbon panels trying to help horse racing. I love horses. It's my passion. I want to protect horses. I want to do everything I can to get it right the first time, not pass a bill that I think goes a long way to help, but doesn't go far enough. So what I'm trying to do is come before you and explain to you the things that I think that need to be added in order to help preserve the health, safety, and welfare of our horses and our jockeys. So let me talk about a few things that are missing from this bill. The National Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association has worked very hard for the past 6 months, trying to move forward with amendments to this bill that would be acceptable to the industry. And I have been in front of legislatures in our state a number of times. I think there's widespread support for this bill. And therefore, it makes more sense to me to try and amend this bill to get it right instead of crafting a totally new bill and starting over again. The things that are missing from this bill that I think we need to add to make our horses safe and our jockeys protected would be to come together, which we're doing. We've met a number of times with a special committee of our representatives to talk about racing environments that are as safe as any other surface in the world. Equine injury reporting and prevention protocols that brings the United States of America racing injuries and fatalities in line with international injury statistics. Safe and consistent racing surfaces through scientific monitoring and maintenance. Uniform equine medication and testing standards, including a significant increase in out-of-competition testing, because that's where you're going to catch the cheaters. We do a lot of tests post-race, but you'll catch more people with out-of-competition testing. Regulatory transparency and nationwide portability of veterinary records. Everybody should know what pre-existing problems these horses have. You know, H.R. 1754 is not going to accomplish everything we need. We need crop rules that demonstrate the industry's commitment to humane treatment of horses. And it's got to be the same from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. You can't have different jurisdictions all having different rules. And for these horses that we love, we need aftercare policies that ensure homes and second careers for all thoroughbreds. And I think in order to come up with a comprehensive bill, the industry has been working very hard. And I'm opposed to federal legislation. I don't think federal legislation should be in our business. And Mr. DeFrancis is right. For 20 years, I've said we need to be like a real sports league. We need to be like the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball. We need a commissioner who's empowered. And he's right. That's the key word, empowered. But we haven't been able to accomplish that. And although I've been opposed to federal legislation, I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem in preventing this. So I've worked hard with my colleagues on the NTRA Special Committee to come up with comprehensive solutions for you. And these are complicated. We've addressed issues such as potential constitutional challenges to the bill. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the 6-year process I just lived through on sports betting in this country, where the Supreme Court finally overturned PASPA and held it unconstitutional. There will be a challenge to this bill. The funding is misguided. There are racetracks that pay a lot of money to make horses safe, to make the track safe, to do drug testing. And at the end of the day, I think that what you need to understand is there are many segments of our industry that pay nothing to contribute to this. You have ADWs, you have OTWs, and I know my time is up. I'm just going to mention one thing. It starts when these horses are born. You need to look at the medications they're getting as young horses. We had a problem with biophosphates, which finally we understood that these make the horses weak and their bones are frail. So we address those. Yes, I'm finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have concluded witness opening statements. At this time, we will move to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question our witnesses. That's a total question and response. And I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I do have a number of questions, so I hope that the responses can be concise. Racehorses in the United States are injured at a much higher rate than the rest of the horse racing world, resulting in nearly 500 horse deaths in the United States every year. One of the keys in stopping injuries and deaths is establishing standards for drug policies. So, Mr. Irby, many say the use of medication on race day contributes to the injuries that we are seeing. Would we see fewer horse injuries if race day use of medicine were banned?
Yes, Chair Schakowsky, I do believe that we would. The death rate in the U.S. is 2.5 times greater than that of the rest of the world, and they do not allow the use of medication on race day. So we are at the bottom of the barrel along with Canada in that aspect.
So why does a 24-hour period in a race really matter?
Well, I think that that's more of a scientific question. I'm not sure that I could fully answer that, but I would say that there are horses that are trained on some drugs and raced on some other drugs. I think that leaves time for those drugs to leave their system for the most part.
Mr. Lair, horse racing is governed by 38 different racing jurisdictions, which can each adopt their own drug policy. Is this current approach working?
Not at all. Not at all. And it's not just an issue of different rules, different investigations. The whole things that I went through, it's how they adopt the changes they make. Some of them do it by statute, as Florida. Some of them do it by lengthy state regulatory processes, as is the norm in California. Others do it in different ways, so it ends up being a complete patchwork that is never going to be this. Even if uniformity were achieved, it'd be ephemeral, because the next change would have to go through the same gauntlet of different processes.
And for you again, the bill also establishes third-party enforcement for creating and implementing an industry-wide anti-doping program. Why is a new organization needed?
It's needed because the existing system is so fragmented that it can't speak with one voice and act uniformly. This, in the areas that this bill addresses, it would replace the existing multiplicity of systems with one system, and that system would be able to act in the way that I suggested.
Thank you. And Mr. Irby, the bill aims to set a uniform list of substances and treatments that are allowed and those that are prohibited on race day. How will this help to protect our horses?
Well, I think that will help. The bill would provide flexibility in the regulations that would come forward that would enable issues related to horses that actually do require certain medications under certain circumstances.
And Mr. Irby, why is uniformity across the United States necessary?
Well, it's necessary because there are 38 or so racing jurisdictions now with a different set of rules, a multitude of different regulations, and it's a patchwork. So trainers that might have an infraction in one state may go on suspension, and particularly in the Northeast where there's so many states that are close together, they can just pack up and go to another state and race horses at a different track in another state and don't really serve that much of a consequence for their actions.
Got it. Mr. Irby, the Horse Racing Integrity Act would apply protections to the major breeds of racehorses in the United States. That would include thoroughbreds and standardbreds and quarter horses. Why is it so important to ensure all of these major breeds are protected?
Well, I think all horses are first and foremost equally important no matter what breed they are and where they're racing and what type of racing, but there are also a multitude of different types of racing that occur at the same track or several tracks at the same location. There may be thoroughbred or quarter horse racing where there is also harness racing, so you want uniformity across those tracks across the U.S.
I thank you, and I yield back, and the chair recognizes Ms. Rogers, Subcommittee Ranking Member, for 5 minutes to ask questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you everyone for being here today. Mr. Martin, would you explain the current regulatory framework that governs horse racing and how H.R. 1754 will impact it?
Thank you for the question. Let me, in addressing this, I'm sitting here in shock as to the lack of depth of knowledge to what is currently going on. There had been a statement here about a trainer can get a violation and pack up and just go to the next state. That is not true. The regulatory jurisdictions that are members of the ARCI have agreed to reciprocity, so if they're suspended and sanctioned in one state, it carries over to the next state. If you're excluded in New York, you are not allowed to participate in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, state of Washington, doesn't matter. There's also been statements with regards to the extent which horses are running with pain masking medications. We conduct an extensive drug testing program. The numbers are in my written statement. If that statement were true, we would be seeing it. Our clear rate, because we test for that, our clear rate is comparable to the clear rate in the WADA labs worldwide as well as the USADA lab. Do people do that? Yes, they do. And we do detect them. But our clear rate of all the labs worldwide in any sport is about 99.45%, depending on the sport. And while we do see a lot of overages of therapeutic medications, it's a small percentage of all of the horses that are tested. But to create that as the image of what is going on is inaccurate to the facts that are there.
I have a couple more questions.
I'm sorry.
We can, yep. Yep, okay. So do you want to just talk about how you believe 1754 will impact the current regulatory framework?
I think it duplicates a framework that's already in existence. I think the goal of trying to get to uniformity is a very good goal. We believe there's substantial uniformity, but not total uniformity with regard to the testing in the labs.
Okay.
The labs are accredited.
Okay.
And we think you can achieve uniformity by adopting the ARC model rules, which is the basis
Thank
for
you.
everybody.
I'm going to wrap it up there. Mr. Lear, would you explain why you believe the federal government needs to create an independent entity to develop and administer an anti-doping and medication program for your sport?
Yes, we start from the fact that the current system is not working and is not protecting our horses. We agree that the rate of deaths and injuries is unacceptable, and having tried the other ways, once collaboratively within the industry in this program called NUMP, and having tried with an interstate compact, which is the other way we can lawfully work together, and those having failed, at the end of the day, this is our choice. There are other examples of this type thing.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, if enacted, H.R. 1754 would ban all medications from being administered 24 hours before a race, which includes Lasik. Can you explain why Lasik is administered on race day, and if banned, what alternative methods would be used to treat EIPH in horse races?
Well, currently, as you said, Lasix is given at approximately 4 hours prior to racing. It is a very controlled amount, meaning same dose. It is transparent in the program, so everybody knows what's going on. But why would it, the question was?
Why is it administered on race day, and what would the alternative methods be?
Well, as far as I can tell, there are no alternative methods other than managing the horse metabolically, which would be pulling the water in advance, this type of thing. I think my best answer is to tell you how we have a number of horses come to the United States from Europe and other places where they are not able to manage EIPH using management techniques.
Okay, thank you. Final question would just be, are there any concerns about having the Federal Trade Commission oversee this type of program? Would anybody want to address that? Is there anyone on the panel that has concerns about the FTC overseeing? Okay, Mr. Martin.
I'm not sure if this is on or off. We have a problem with a federal agency that really doesn't have any veterinary expertise, being in the position of being the ultimate rulemaker. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, one of the reasons why we're pressing for the incorporation of the ARCI model rules by reference is because that they are the cumulative effect of a prolonged process involving veterinarians, researchers, scientists, affected constituencies in the industry, as well as independent regulators.
Okay. Thank you very much. My time has expired.
The gentlelady yields back, and I recognize Congresswoman Castor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Looking into this issue, I was surprised at how many of the fatal horse injuries are tied to a pre-existing minor injury. There was, I saw information from the California Horse Racing Board that 90% of fatal horse injuries are tied to minor pre-existing injuries like microfractures in the bone. And then you think about the stress of this over 1,000-pound horse sprinting at 40 miles per hour, that would turn a minor injury into something that's catastrophic and ultimately lead to that horse's death. That's why I think focusing on the pre-race detection and appropriate treatment for these injuries will be so important. I know that medications are administered to ease discomfort and reduce inflammation, and that these medications probably mask the injuries, and that makes that pre-race detection much more difficult. I wonder, Mr. McCarron and Mr. DeFrancis, how prevalent is the use of pain medication in horse racing, and is that contributing to the high rate of deaths?
The short answer to your question, Congresswoman, is yes. It is very prevalent, and it is the major factor that contributes to the high rate of deaths. The challenge that we face is that virtually every medication, by its very definition, has therapeutic qualities and has negative health-endangering or performance-enhancing qualities. Lasix is a great example. Lasix is very therapeutic for that small percentage of the horses that have a genetic propensity to suffer from exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhaging, EIPH. And it is administered on those horses. It has the therapeutic effect of allowing them to race where they otherwise would not be able to do so. The problem is that the number of horses that suffer from that malady is a small percentage of the overall racing population, yet virtually 100% of the horses race on it. Why? The other 94% that don't need it to solve EIPH are using it as a performance enhancer because it flushes 20 pounds of water weight out of their system and allows them to race with less weight and thus run faster. The problem is you've got 90+ percentage of horses racing in a dehydrated state. You don't need to be a medical doctor to understand the negative impacts of that. All of these issues, the reason why USADA is so critical to this bill is not because of the medications and drugs that exist today, but because of the medications and drugs that are being developed right now, mostly in human labs for human applications that are then transmitted to equine applications, that mask pain, that have a whole variety of potentially therapeutic impacts, but can also be used in a way that is very damaging and dangerous to the horse's health and safety. It is a balancing test, a balancing act that needs to be done on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis into the future. There is no organization that is better qualified in the world to conduct that balancing than USADA. They have the greatest, they are acknowledged worldwide as having the greatest repository of scientific knowledge and expertise anywhere in the world. Most importantly, despite the best intentions of racing commissions around the country in various states, the many racing commissioners are subject to the tug and pull of different kinds of conflicts. They're responsible for all other aspects of the sport. USADA is completely independent. They would have no conflicts whatsoever, no other motivations other than what is in the best interest of the health, welfare, and safety of the equine athlete.
Okay, Mr. McCarron, do you agree with that?
That's loud.
I know.
Yeah, yes, I certainly do. And I have personal experience with Lasix. As a jockey, I had to work hard to watch my weight throughout my career. And there was a period of time when I resorted to taking Lasix on a daily basis. And I got to tell you how horrible it feels trying to be an athlete and perform in a dehydrated fashion. If I walk into the jockey's room and I get on the scale and I weigh 115 pounds stripped, I have to go get in the hot box and pull 3 or 4 pounds in order to be able to get my weight down to the weight that has been assigned to carry that for that horse to carry. And the other measures are taking Lasix is another very, laxatives are very, they used to be prominent, but not so much anymore. But it's very easy to pop a Lasix pill and go ahead and shed 3 or 4 pounds of water weight. And I tell you what, it takes its toll on the rider towards the end of the day. You feel exhausted.
Thank you.
And now I recognize the ranking member on the subcommittee, Mr. Walden, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My apologies for not being here.
Not on the subcommittee, on the full committee.
That's all right. We'll take it. Thank you. We had another hearing going on about wildfires and safety of power lines and all, and everything going on downstairs, so I've been at that one. But I did want to come up here because I wanted to extend a warm welcome to all of you for being here. Protecting the health of horses is important to all of us in this room, and we know it evokes pretty strong passions. And we all want to do what's right. We may have some disagreements on what that is, and that's what brings us here today. And, you know, in my district, I have all of Eastern Oregon. We got 50,000 people come to the Great Pendleton Roundup, one of the great rodeos of all time. You are all welcome, by the way. It's in September. We'll see you there. But we also have small rodeos as well, and so the life and health of horses and all animals is part of our culture in Eastern Oregon. Last Congress, we had a similar hearing on similar legislation. Then it was H.R. 2651, the Horse Racing Integrity Act 2017. and discussed many of the issues that you all have been discussing today. Since that time, of course, tragically, we've lost 13 horses at Santa Anita. I understand that probably doesn't have anything to do with Lasix necessarily, but again, it's about the welfare of the horses. So we appreciate your input. Mr. Lear, I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to address to you. Please address Mr. Drazen's concern, I heard it when I came in, that the Horse Racing Integrity Act, if passed, might face a constitutional challenge. Do you believe this bill is constitutional? If so, why?
Yes, I do, and we worked. I'm a lawyer, but
I won't hold that against you.
We involved. That's perfectly fine. I'm still recovering. We involved some really sophisticated constitutional lawyers. We were aware of the PASPA litigation before it was decided. We took a hard look at this to make sure we didn't run afoul of anti-commandeering. We have tailored the bill not to run afoul of issues relating to delegation. We have continued to follow the Supreme Court positions on various of the issues, and we are confident that it would withstand a constitutional challenge.
All right. Of course, none of us would know until it goes to court and the judges rule, but I wanted to make sure you had a chance to respond. And I'd also like you to respond to Mr. Martin's argument that the bill does not address the gaping hole that he cited, namely that horses not under the jurisdiction of a government agency. Would H.R. 1754 solve that, in your opinion?
In some ways it would, because it would have the ability to look back at horses coming in to racing. Bisphosphonates is an example of a medication that has recently come to light and got a lot of attention. I will say that there are entities within the industry that reacted very quickly to that. The thoroughbred sales companies. One of my other hats is as a trustee of Keeneland, and we moved very quickly to adopt standards that would allow the testing for bisphosphonates at the sale, and we sell early as yearlings, so, as weanlings, which is even before their first year, which that takes it very far back. You can reject if it's a positive test. And by the way, one thing I want to say about that, if the rest of the industry cooperated like the sales companies do in having the same rules of the game, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today.
Right. And I've been told the cost of implementing H.R. 1754 would require the standard-bred horse racing industry and the thoroughbred horse racing industry to pay unequal amounts. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
I'm not sure about the source of that information. The way in which all of our estimates of cost have been put together is to look at the total number of starts, the total number of horses, and what is currently being spent today. So in our estimates, we've blended it together, and I have not heard that particular criticism.
That takes care of that one. Dr. Anderson, thank you for being here. In your testimony, you mentioned the therapeutic use exemption allows an athlete in the Olympics to compete in competition under the influence of an otherwise banned performance-enhancing substance. So my question is, if this bill were enacted, all medications, including therapeutic drugs, would be banned. So as a veterinarian, is that concerning? Is that something we should be concerned about?
That is concerning, although my understanding is that the bill would accommodate for appropriate withdrawal periods. However, I think that I would like to just address some of the statements here, which are regarding Lasix, that, for example, that has no scientific evidence as being detrimental to horse welfare. And I think that we confuse sometimes that medication with illicit doping.
All right. Thank you for that. Madam Chair, thanks for your courtesy. My time's expired. I yield back.
Thank you, and I now yield to Congresswoman Kelly for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses. Mr. Martin, I want to go back to the Los Angeles County District Office's recently concluded investigation. What do you think those investigations tell us about medication overall in the horse racing industry?
One of the things that, the reason why we're proposing that the horses be tracked from the minute they're registered and the veterinary records be deposited with either a government agency or an NGO on a national basis is because we need to understand what's going on with those horses. And I think what the district attorney's investigation pretty much reaffirmed the concern that we have as an organization. Drugs in society play a necessary role. They keep us healthy. They make us healthy when we're sick, but they can be abused just as they are in humans. We feel, and with all due respect to my friend Mr. Lear, who talked about what's in the bill, we feel we need to have that information when those horses show up under the jurisdiction of a regulatory agency. The regulatory vet can pull up their entire medical record that those horses have been flagged if they've had any kind of condition throughout their career. Just as if any one of us were diagnosed with cancer. My wife's a cancer survivor. When she was diagnosed 20 years ago, they have followed her very closely, and that's what we need to do to these horses.
And they made several recommendations to improve safety and reduce fatalities. I'm assuming you agree with these safety concerns, and are there more recommendations that you would recommend, and have these concerns been adopted across or these suggestions been adopted across the country?
I would need to review that and answer that for the record.
Okay. And in addition to the issues around the use of medication, do you think improving protocols for identifying pre-existing conditions and track maintenance would improve overall safety for horses and jockeys?
Absolutely, Congressman.
And to our retired jockey, do you feel there's more that we can do to make the industry safer for jockeys?
Oh, yes, I certainly do. I think that if I had my way, it would be just hay, oats, and water. Simply put, I think an athlete that does not have a say-so in what medications are administered cannot protect itself. I think horses' careers would last longer if they trained and raced on nothing but hay, oats, and water. I joined WOA as a member on May 19th of 2014, and I firmly believe that a trainer, if he's got enough knowledge, enough talent to train horses, should have the ability to get the job done without any medication. Other than when a horse becomes ill, you certainly need to take the measures to protect the horse's health that way. But as far as their legs are concerned, they're going across the ground at 40 miles an hour, carrying anywhere from 900 to 1,200 pounds. And if something is amiss, it was stated earlier that pre-existing conditions include microfractures. Well, those microfractures become real fractures when a beast of that size is getting across the ground so quickly, carrying 120 pounds on its back. They're very susceptible to injury already, and if they have anything that's pre-existing whatsoever, it will come out. That's for sure.
Mr. Irby, did you want to comment on that?
I think that no athlete, as Mr. McCarron said, that does not have a choice in the matter should be given drugs like our human athletes do. It's about the health and the safety and the welfare of the horse, and if they're in pain, they can't tell you they're in pain necessarily. They don't have the ability to speak to us, so really and truly, there's no way to actually know when you're giving a horse certain medications if it's actually causing pain or alleviating the pain.
And Mr. McCarron, I was asking about, I know if the horse is healthy and safe, then that leads to the jockey, but anything we should be doing for the jockeys, any regulations that should be different for your health and safety beside the horse?
Well, as Mr. Drazen had mentioned earlier, I'm interested in how the regulations and rules are going to apply to the use of the crop. That has nothing to do with the horse's health, but as far as measures to further protect the jockeys, the key is running sound horses and riding sound horses. That's the key.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all the witnesses, and I yield back.
Mr. Carter, you're recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for being here. It's certainly an important subject. Dr. Anderson, I want to start with you, and I want to ask you, is furosemide, I know it's used to treat exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhaging. Is it used for any other reasons? Let me ask you this. Is it administered for any other reason aside from that?
No, it is not.
So that's the only reason it's administered?
The only reason.
It does have other effects.
It has a diuretic effect, and that would be the only effect.
Okay, and what kind, does that give a horse an advantage of any type, a diuretic effect? I mean, if a horse loses 20 to 30 pounds after the administration of, like, I'm a pharmacist, so I'm familiar with furosemide, and I know what it does, and I know that it's used to treat edema, to treat hypertension, and that you remove fluid from the body, which makes it easier for the blood to flow?
That would typically be given for a scenario where you actually had pathology in place. So these are horses they're only treated with Lasix on race day. Those pathologies have not in place because they have had their pre-race exam, et cetera. But I do think that the important thing to know is there is no science that is reliable that relates EIPA, or the treatment of furosemide, to performance enhancing. It allows them to perform to their ability because it removes well, it doesn't remove, it ameliorates the EIPH syndrome.
If you take 20 to 30 pounds of fluid off of a horse, can they run faster?
I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure that anybody does. In humans, that is correct. But for example, where I practice, we ship to 7 different states on any given day, and those horses are all going to be losing weight just shipping.
Dr. Anderson, I'm not a veterinarian, but common sense would tell me that if you take 20 to 30 pounds off of an animal, they're going to perform.
That's common sense, but that's not science, and that's all I'm trying to speak from.
Okay. Okay. So when is furosemide administered, typically?
4 hours pre-race.
Is that allowed under the current system?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Is it allowed anywhere else outside of North America?
Canada.
Which is North America?
Sorry, yes.
Is it?
I'm Canadian too.
That's scientific, but nevertheless, I'm sorry. Anywhere, is the use of furosemide allowed anywhere outside of North America?
Not on race day. It is used during training extensively overseas in any of those.
Why is that?
It's, I think the thing to back up to is why do we use it? We use it to assist with protecting our horses from equine and exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that everybody recognizes is that Lasix, furosemide, has the ability to decrease the incidence of that during horses at high speed.
Okay. Mr. McCarron, thank you for being here. We're just delighted that you're here, and I'm excited to have a Hall of Fame jockey here. But I want to ask you.
Thank you, sir.
Could this legislation that we are considering today, what would it mean for the safety of jockeys if we were to implement this?
Nothing but purely sound horses would be competing. And if I may just briefly address can a horse run faster with 20 to 30 pounds less? Very often, or quite occasionally, a horse will drop the rider leaving the starting gate and get loose. And more often than not, that horse will run around the track and be in front because he's not carrying 120 pounds. So a diminished amount of weight in the horse will allow them to run faster without question.
Hence, that's why we don't see any jockeys over 200 pounds, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I've got one last question, and this one's to you, Mr. Martin. I've sat here and during this hearing, and I hear you say that the current system's fine, and we may need to tweak it some. Why are we having all these horses dying if we don't need to implement something like this? I mean, it would be irresponsible for us to sit up here as members of Congress and ignore the fact that we've had all these horses dying. Why are they dying?
Congressman, I I'm not here to say that the existing system's fine. In my opening statement and in my written statement, I basically called for a major expansion of the regulatory authority over horses that does not actually exist today. And I think that that's necessary to basically be able to track those horses, to keep the at-risk horses off the racetrack. It's the pre-existing conditions, it's the things that we don't know about that is causing these horses to die. And the more information you put in the hand of that regulatory veterinarian. I was brought into the state of New Mexico for the Attorney General. They did an investigation about a jockey that had died crossing the finish line as the horse broke down at one of the quarter horse tracks. And when I went through all the vet records, when I went through every piece of paper at the Racing Commission, at the racetrack, at the vet records, the thing that hit me is that this horse had conditions that nobody knew about. So if those vet records weren't centrally warehoused, and I tell you, if that were my brother that died, I would have, I'm not even going to go there. But that's the hole in the regulatory scheme. And we need to talk about that. And
Well, my time's up, and I'm sorry it's up because I'll be quite honest with you, I was really not looking forward to this, but as I sat through this hearing, this has been fascinating. We need to address this. This needs to be addressed. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Cardenas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky, and thank you for hosting this very important hearing. Some of the folks in this whole process have a voice, and some of the participants in this process have no voice. And we need to do our best to be a voice for everyone to make some common sense legislation. I just want to point out, so I don't forget, I just have a little side note. Apparently there's a 2.5 times higher rate of racehorse deaths in the United States versus other parts of the country, the world. So obviously, there's things that we can do better here in the United States that perhaps human beings, whether you call them regulators, legislators, kings, or whoever runs those countries, they seem to be focused a little bit better, more accurately on at least the livelihood of the horses and their safety more than we are here. So we have a lot of work to do in America. The American Horse Council published a study in 2017 on the economic impact of horse racing. And in California, the horse racing industry reports over 10,000 direct jobs and adds over $870 million in direct value to the state's economy. I'm proud to have some of these equine serving businesses in my district, but in recent decades, horse racing has struggled. In 2002, apparently, there was $15 billion that was bet on thoroughbred races in the United States. And in 2018, that fell down to about $11 billion. In 2002, nearly 33,000 young race horses were registered, and last year that number fell to about 19,900. This year alone, 5 horses have died at Santa Anita Racetrack, which is near my district in California. And according to an investigation by a task force created last year by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, 56 horses have died from July 1st, 2018 through November 30th, 2019. And as a member of Congress, I think I have a responsibility to represent all of my constituents, including those that do not have a voice, and make sure that we are making good, sound decisions and making sure that our society is working in the right vein for every one involved. Speaking as a former business owner myself, if you want the horse racing industry to survive and succeed, then we need to win back the trust of the people, and the industry must put the health of horses at the top of our priority list. And I have a quick question for Mr. McCarron. What languages are likely spoken in the backstretch? They call it the backstretch, the people who work with the horses all day and the people behind the scenes?
Yes, sir, we call it the backstretch. Backside, backstretch.
Is there more than one language spoken there often? Or
It's predominantly Hispanic.
Yeah, so what languages do they tend to speak? Spanish?
Yes.
Yeah. The reason why I asked that question is because I just want to show my respect to the invisible people in this industry, people who work really, really long hours, people who are true professionals, and I believe that every single one of them love these horses very much. I know that when my father, when I saw him get on the horse later on in his life, he became a different person. it took him back to the days when he grew up on a horse. So much respect to the people who dedicate their time and energy to the well-being of these horses. They're not scientists, they don't have degrees, they don't speak from a point of science, but they sure as heck know what the heck they're doing. And I just want to throw my respect to them. Mr. Drazen, to what extent have concerns about the safety of horse racing affects the sport's popularity? And do you agree? I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Drazen.
Certainly. This past year has been difficult for our industry. There were 35-plus breakdowns at Santa Anita Racetrack in your backyard. And I'm here to tell you today that those breakdowns had nothing to do with Lasix, had nothing to do with medication. They had to do with the safety issues relative to Santa Anita Racetrack. And that's where they need to address this. PETA has had a big voice, and the problem in the past has been we in the industry knew that horses break down, hopefully less and less, but they do break down. But it's become a public relations nightmare with what's happening.
When you say breakdown, you mean they die?
They die.
Okay.
Some-
Well,
some
I
broke
hope
down.
that when I break down, people don't refer to me as I broke down. I think, with all due respect, I think that plays down the fact of the matter is that we lost a life. And my time is up, sir, so I yield back.
Well, if I could, some are
It's up to the
injured.
chair. I'm sorry, it's up to the chair.
May I answer the question?
No, his time is up. That's how it works. I'm going to call on Mr. Soto and then Mr. Tonko, and then I'm going to ask, I'll do it now, unanimous consent for, to break the rules.
Are you okay to testify on the second panel?
Is there another panel?
Yeah, we can have him testify.
Is there a second panel?
No, we can have him testify on the second.
Okay, so I guess how we will do it so that I am not totally delinquent, but allowing you to speak, we will immediately reconvene a second panel, at which time the co-sponsor of this legislation can speak. I ask unanimous consent to do that. Hearing no objection, that's what we're going to do. And so now, Mr. Soto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In preparation for this hearing, I was looking at the history of horse racing, and it's really amazing. 6,000 years of domestication, 4,500 years where we've had horse racing. I mean, that is a long time, and it shows the special relationship between humans and horses. In Florida, it's really popular. Tampa Bay Downs, Hialeah, Gulfstream, Pensacola, and there's even a horse racing culture in Ocala and Palm Beach in the state of Florida. In my own area, in Central Florida, we have the Florida Cracker Horse, not known for its speed, but it does carry a lot of ranchers around and has origin in, among the Spanish many years ago. But we see advancing technology and advancing pharmaceuticals and different techniques that are a threat to the sport. We saw it before in baseball and in the Olympics and now in horse racing. And I can't imagine how much the temptation is when it's such an expensive sport, when there's so much invested in these horses and so much money at stake. But at the end of the day, people enjoy the sport because it's hard fought and it has to be fair, so that when we see someone cross the finish line, it means something. It's not just because they found some way to get around the rules. I applaud both Representative Tonko and Representative Barr for putting forward a bipartisan bill to ensure the integrity of this popular sport that is really important to Floridians. And I wanted to just ask the whole panel, each of you one by one, do you think this bill will help restore integrity to the sport? If so, why? If not, then name one recommendation that should be considering, and let's start with Mr. Irby.
Yes, I do think it would greatly improve the integrity of the sport, save equine lives, and if I could add one thing, it would be requirements about the reporting of the medical history of the horses.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Martin.
I don't think the bill as it's presently written is going to improve the integrity of the sport. What I think would improve the integrity of the sport would to take that non-governmental organization, turn it into a multi-jurisdictional investigative situation to do out-of-competition testing as well as out-of-competition suitability exams to do the reviews of horses that are red flagged because of their vet records and procedures that maybe we need to know more about them.
Thank you. Mr. Lear.
I think this will do a world to improve the integrity of the sport and the interest of people in it. The two things that most drive people away from our sport are concerns about whether it's really fair and breakdowns. Nothing runs fans away from horse racing like the death of a horse. Having been involved with the development of this bill with the the co-sponsors, primary co-sponsors from the start, it'd be hard for me to say there's anything I particularly have left out at this point, but we have worked. I will say this, we have worked with a lot of other people, including AAEP, the vets, and some others that are in opposition to the bill, trying to find common ground so that we can all pull in the same direction.
Thank you, Mr. Lear. Dr. Anderson.
I believe that it would improve the integrity from an anti-doping perspective. I do not think it would change very much on the therapeutic medication. And I think if I was to add to this, it would be significant reforms in the area of safety. And I think it's totally lacking in safety oversight.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Mr. DeFrancis.
An unquestionable yes to your question, Congressman. It would undoubtedly improve the integrity of the sport, most importantly in the perception of our customers, in the perception of the general public, whose support we need in order to have a viable business.
Thanks. And Mr. McCarron, thanks for appearing today, by the way, and your
Well,
opinion
thank
on the
you.
subject.
You're very welcome. Yes, I certainly do feel it would definitely improve the integrity. Back in 2003, I was hired as general manager at Santa Anita Park. I did that. I was in that position for about a year and a half. The number one complaint I had from patrons, I had them coming into my office on a daily basis saying that the integrity of the sport is just abysmal, that they're sick and tired of betting on races, not knowing who the cheaters are, not knowing which horses are going to be coming out of barns that are not playing by the rules. And something drastic has to be done, and I believe I have a lot of faith in this bill that it would accomplish just that.
Thank you. And Mr. Drazen.
Thank you. This bill will not save racehorses. There will still be injuries. There will still be deaths. What it will do, I agree, is it will accomplish something in changing the public's perception of being able to promote that all horses are medication-free on race day. And I think that may restore some public confidence. But I think in order to save horses, what I'd like to see changed is that we incorporate amendments that deal with racetrack safety, accreditation of your horses, pre-existing injuries, detection of horses that have problems on race day. In Monmouth Park in New Jersey, a state vet examines every horse every day that they're going to race. We need uniformity throughout the country, in order to protect these horses.
Thank you. And my time has expired.
Mr. Vesey, welcome, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to talk with you about some of the safety concerns with the jockeys and the horses. Is there any sort of correlation with certain tracks and lower purses as it relates to these safety concerns? Are we seeing more incidents of some of the things that y'all have been talking about today at tracks that don't have as higher purses versus tracks that may be more well-organized that bring in more people where we see the purses higher? Anybody?
I think that's correct.
Yes, the short answer to your question is yes.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And I think there are tracks who don't go through the NTRA track safety accreditation. If everybody did it, we'd have a safer product. There are tracks that need to examine the horses, state vets looking at these horses before they get out there, and sharing medical records. If you claim a horse and that horse has been treated, you could have a horse that you claim that had a fracture, had a plate and screws put in there. Next guy doesn't know till he gets the horse. So we need to share these records from day one all the way through racing.
And if I may, sir, there certainly is a correlation between lower purses and less opportunity for jockeys and for trainers. For instance, Sam Houston Race Park, the purses there are nowhere near what they are in New York or Florida or California. And the horses are of a much lower class. And I don't have any cold hard facts in front of me to prove it, but I do believe that there is a correlation between lower purses, smaller tracks, and probably a higher rate of breakdown, which very often ends up in injury to the jockey.
Right. Well, yeah, that's very concerning. I have a track in my district in Grand Prairie that since before I was in Congress, they've complained about the low purses at that track and how they've been bleeding clients for quite a long time. And of course, the jockeys and the horse people, they don't want to bring their better horses there to those tracks. And if that's causing a safety concern too, as it relates to the jockeys and the horses, I think that's really bad. Do you think that states that don't have gaming, because a lot of lower purses have been tied to no gaming at these tracks. The people that I've talked to in the past have said that they would have higher purses if they had gaming also in conjunction with horse racing. Do you think that that makes a difference? Have y'all seen the tracks that do actually have gaming, or are there better safety records at those tracks?
Again, the short answer to your question, Congressman, is yes. Ironically, I was actually part of the group back in the mid-'90s that was awarded the license to construct the racetrack that you now refer to in your home district in Grand Prairie, so I'm very familiar with your district. Unfortunately, safety costs money. That's the hard reality. And the more money that is available, then the higher safety standards and better testing protocols and more effective enforcement you can have. It's really not too much more complicated than that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yield back.
Yes, and now I recognize Mr. Tonko, who has waved on to the committee and is a chief sponsor of this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Martin, in your testimony, you state that ARCI is in favor of uniformity, but prefer a voluntary approach. And similarly, Mr. Drazen, you support uniformity and a commissioner-like approach to the sport, and yet oppose the only piece of legislation that would make that happen. And then, Dr. Anderson, you strongly support uniformity in your testimony as well. So we're all, in theory, talking about the same goals, and yet each of you opposes the very piece of legislation that would make this a reality instead of a tired talking point. So my question to any of you, and it's mostly a rhetorical one, is when can we actually expect results from this scheme? We've received countless promises from the industry for decades, and yet here we are in 2020 with more than 40 deaths on the tracks in Santa Anita, further tarnishing the sport in the eyes of the American public. When is enough enough? We've always had an open door, and I continue to be patient and open to working with you, as I believe my colleague, Representative Barr, has been, to incorporate feedback to the legislation. But the time for talk is done. We have a plan before us that is an action plan that respects the equine athlete from a medications perspective. Other ripple effects will come from this to the good. And I say, let's not stop at doing the good here. We need action, not more promises, which is why I'm proud that this legislation is moving forward. Dr. DeFrancis, I want to come back to address the Lasix question directly. I think your testimony provides the best perspective when it comes to how regulators should be evaluating the drug by using a cost-benefit analysis. Can you explain to the committee why the cost of continuing to allow race day administration of Lasix vastly outweigh the benefits?
I think the simple answer is, again, trying to conduct this balance. The benefit is that we are allowing a small percentage, and the numbers vary, but it's in the neighborhood of 6%, of the horses that have a genetic predisposition to EIPH to be able to be therapeutically treated by Lasix and thus race, where they otherwise would not be able to. That's the benefit. The cost is that the 94% of the horses that are not genetically prone to suffering from EIPH are using it purely as a performance enhancer to eliminate water weight and allow them to run faster because they're carrying less weight. Anyone that's ever engaged in any kind of athletic endeavor knows that if you dehydrate it and you're running as fast as you can, it's going to have a whole host of negative health impacts on your body. And that's the reason why every other jurisdiction in the world outside of the United States and Canada, the UK, continental Europe, South Africa, the Middle East, Japan, Hong Kong, take your pick, all prohibit the use of race day Lasix because in conducting that cost-benefit analysis, they've concluded that the scales tip very heavily in favor of not allowing it.
Well, thank you, Mr. DeFrancis. I've done a lot of work on the opioid crisis, and let me make an analogy to another drug as it relates to humans, that being the opioids. We all know that opioids are highly effective in addressing pain, but the cost-benefit analysis requires their judicious use because the costs to the individual and society are so high when opioids are inappropriately prescribed to people who simply don't need them. Mr. DeFrancis, it seems that every other major racing jurisdiction in the world has done this same cost-benefit analysis with regard to race day Lasix and decided to ban the drug on race day. How have these racing jurisdictions managed to thrive despite the use of race day Lasix?
I think probably the biggest single distinction between their thriving without it and the way we race in America is we have a much higher percentage of races that are run on dirt in America than they are overseas, and particularly in Europe and in other parts of the world. And we race more often. There's a lot more. There's just more racing in the United States than there is in foreign countries. And so that's one reason why they've been able to succeed without using race day medication. I think the far more important issue, however, is, and you referenced it earlier, Congressman, the problem generally of drugs and medications and their impact on horses' health and well-being has been brewing for years, almost like a growing tsunami. Now, the tsunami is about to crest and destroy us all. We have been fiddling while Rome has been smoldering. Now Rome is engulfed in flames in an absolute inferno. As I mentioned in my direct testimony, we are losing at an increasing rate the confidence of our basic customers. No business can survive long when that happens. I've run a business for 20 years and had to make payroll. I know what you need to do. And when your customers, Chris mentioned his time as general manager of Santa Anita, this crisis has now reached, this problem has now reached crisis proportions. And we can't I agree with many of the things that Mr. Martin and Mr. Drazen have said in terms of things that we can do to improve horse health and safety. But let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. We need to take action right away. Every day that we delay, we are losing more and more public support, more and more fans, more and more customers, and it's going to be that much more difficult to get them back.
Well, let me thank all of the perspectives in this sport, in this industry, for your participation on the legislation. And I appreciate my colleague and friend, Representative Barr, for all the work that we've been able to do together with that input. So let's move forward with progress. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. And again, thank you for the opportunity for the hearing.
Thank you. We have the chairman of the full committee who is here, Mr. Pallone, who is now recognized for questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I said in my opening remarks that we can all agree that the safety of the sport and the health of the animals is most important, and to make the sport safer, we need to identify the factors contributing to horses breaking down. So my questions are of my friend, Mr. Drazen. Dennis, thanks for being here again. In your written testimony, you state that there are areas of concern not addressed in this legislation that could improve the health and welfare of racehorses. I know you said a little bit about it, but what are those, if you want to elaborate a little more on those areas of concern and to what extent they're contributing to racehorse injuries and fatalities specifically?
Sure. So it starts, I guess, a good reference for me was I was chairman of the New Jersey Racing Commission. Racing was about to close down in New Jersey. Governor Christie at the time said either someone's going to take over the track, state's not going to run it. And I stepped off the commission to do that. So the first thing that I did when I came into Monmouth Park was I addressed track safety. I spent the money that was necessary to make sure that we had a professional crew that came in there, added dirt, added base, did whatever was necessary to ensure that these horses would race over a safe surface. And that worked. Monmouth has had a lower breakdown rate than Santa Anita, a lower breakdown rate than the national average. But frankly, I'm not here to tell you it's okay with me if one horse breaks down. It's not. So you start with making your track safe. Then you have to make sure that medical records of these horses are shared, because a lot of these horses have pre-existing conditions that the vets know about, the owners know about, but the next person down the line doesn't know about them. And when those horses are already compromised, it creates a safety problem. In my own life, when my horses have a problem, I give them time. I get them healthy again. No horse runs better than a healthy horse that's sound. So that's the way I handle it. But the industry, has people that have money, people that are struggling. So not everybody can do that. Then you need to make sure that you address certifications of racetrack safety. So the NTRA, which is our National Thoroughbred Horsemen's Organization, has a committee that certifies racetracks for safety. Every track should be certified for safety. And I think when we talk about medications, we do things, to react to issues that are going on. So we have third-party administration of Lasix.
Well, let me ask you about the medication, because we're going to run out of time, so I had kind of two questions, Dennis, if I could put them into one. You suggested that modifications to the current medication protocols and regulatory structure may not actually protect the health and welfare of the racehorses, could actually harm them. So I wanted to explain that, but then also you stated that a uniform anti-doping and medication control program and standardized medication protocols is needed. So, and so I wanted to say how we can best go about creating such a program and protocol. You try to answer both of those, because otherwise we're going to run out of time.
Yeah, I think federal legislation is the wrong way to go. But in response to what Congressman Tonko said before, we all want to accomplish the same thing. So we've been working very hard with the NTRA. There are about 30 of us that sit around the room, and we're compromising. We're going to come up with a more comprehensive bill that addresses all of these issues.
But specifically with regard to the ban on medication like Lasix,
So Lasix is something that is therapeutic for horses. The AAEP says it's the only therapeutic treatment of horses that will help these horses. And I was around in the days when New York did not permit Lasix. Lasix has slowly gained acceptance if you go back a number of decades. And in New York, when you couldn't use Lasix and other jurisdictions used them, we had problems in New York. So they would draw them from water a day before. They would muzzle them so they wouldn't feed these horses, trying to accomplish the same weight loss. They would cheat. They would give these horses medications, not race day, but the day before, things like Kentucky Red, things that they were experimenting with to see if they can hold the bleeding. And they're going to continue to do that. If you ban Lasix, number one, my track, Monmouth Park, we probably won't survive. I don't think we'll be able to get enough horses to participate, because probably 80 to 90% of our horses run on Lasix now. We're not a jurisdiction that has a casino. I think New York gets $250 million a year for their racing industry. Pennsylvania gets a similar number. New Jersey doesn't get that kind of money. So we rely upon the horses that come to us, and they compete. And if you have a 5-horse field, because horses can't compete anymore because they can't compete unless they get Lasix, instead of a 10 or 12-horse field, you're going to lose revenues. You're not going to be able to make ends meet, and then you're going to start rolling back on your other commitments that you have to your horses to make it safe there. You're not going to have money for dirt. You're not going to have money to work on the base. I want to do what's right for horse racing, and I would pledge to all of you to continue to work with the NTRA and this special committee that we have to develop a more comprehensive plan. I'm frustrated by the delay. I agree with Congressman Tonko. It's taken too long. But we're at a crisis now. Because of what happened at Santa Anita, the whole focus of the industry is on saving horse racing because we recognize we're heading in the wrong direction. And I think that if you give us, I'm going to go out on a limb and say another 6 months, we'll be able to come together with a consensus bill that would be better for the industry.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So that concludes our first panel. I want to thank all the witnesses who are here today. I think this was really an excellent conversation that we've had, and hopefully we'll be able to move forward together. And at this time, I ask that staff prepare the witness table so that we may begin our second panel shortly. And once again, we are all appreciative of your thoughtful contributions to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get out of your way.
We know our names.
I'm starting to forget mine. I'm having an
Only the little
identity
wooden
crisis.
You might still need those. I know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, if we could clear away from the table and allow Mr. Barr to be seated.
Mr. Rogers ran it.
Oh, okay. That's right, she said she'd be right back.
I grew up. I'm with the. Join me?
Yeah, but we're only listening to you.
As soon as the ranking member returns, we will begin. Thank you. I will now introduce the witness, the one witness, for our second panel. Congressman Andy Barr, who represents Kentucky's 6th District, 6th Congressional District. You are recognized for an opening statement for 5 minutes. Is our tradition. We will not be asking questions of a member, but you are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky. Thank you for your leadership in holding this hearing. Thank you, Ranking Member Kathy McMorris-Rogers, for your leadership in holding this important hearing. And I want to thank my co-sponsor and the author of this legislation, Paul Tonko, for his leadership in striving towards reform of the horse industry in a way that will advance the safety, the integrity, and the international competitiveness of this sport. And as was indicated by the ranking member, I do have the privilege of representing the what is known as the horse capital of the world. My friend Mr. Tonko sometimes quibbles with that because New York is such a great racing state. But this is a beautiful sport. It has a rich heritage and history. And it has, in addition to being part of the fabric of our culture in New York and Florida and Maryland and California and Kentucky and other great states, it is a massive economic impact to our country and obviously to our states. And we need to preserve the safety of the equine athletes, the human athletes involved, and the integrity of the sport and the international competitiveness, both of our racing stock and our breeding stock, in order to continue to earn the public's confidence so that we can continue to have the jobs and economic activity that this rich sport and industry provides to so many of our constituents. Let me just take the opportunity to I think the problem has been well laid out, the 38 different conflicting jurisdictions. Let me take the balance of my time to address some of the issues. I think that some of the recommendations by some of our witnesses who oppose the legislation make sense. I think we should listen to those recommendations, including Mr. Martin's view that we need to bring more of these horses under government supervision. That's what our bill would do. Mr. Drazen's point that we do have a public perception problem. He doesn't think that this will prevent breakdowns because he's focused on track maintenance. Track maintenance is an issue, but it's not the only issue, and uneven medication rules is a part of it, and covering up and masking the pain of the horse is a true issue. This will reduce breakdowns. I think sharing medical records, uniformity of track condition and maintenance standards makes sense. Certification of race track safety makes sense. The NTRS special committees make a lot of sense, and they're doing good work. But this idea that federal legislation is the wrong way to go, if you go back to the Jockey Club minutes from the 1970s and the 1980s when they were discussing medication reform, they were saying back then that we don't need federal legislation. The efforts to reform the industry by the industry itself, the efforts through interstate compacts have failed. Mr. Lear pointed that out. With respect to FTC oversight, I want to point out to the members considering this legislation that the architecture of this bill fully makes sure that we have industry representation, expertise that would go into the formulation and enforcement of the rules, especially and including veterinarians to inform the process. I would point out that the opponents of the legislation, Mr. Martin, Dr. Anderson, and Mr. Drazen, all indicated that they support uniformity that has not been achieved in 40 or 50 years of trying without Congress. I want to also point out something that has not been mentioned, and that is that handle drives this sport. We've seen a decline in handle, meaning that horse players and participants, wagerers, are losing interest in this sport. That is the lifeblood of this industry. It means bigger purses. We need to attract a new generation of fans that do have competition in terms of the entertainment dollar out there. The decline in handle is an indication that we need reform, and if we can attract a new generation of fans, that will drive purses, and that will be the solution for Monmouth Park, not just putting our head in the sand on this. International competitiveness. If you talk to participants in this sport in France and in the United Kingdom and in Dubai and in Japan and Australia, where they have no race day medication, there is a reputation problem with our product. And coming from the breeding capital of the world where we sell yearlings, this reputational problem is a big deal, and international competitiveness can be repaired, and the sales can be repaired internationally if we have additional integrity. Finally, on the issue of Lasix, which admittedly is a controversial topic, you know, Dr. Anderson indicated that there is only one therapeutic indication for Lasix or Salix, and that is EIPH. If you go to any major track in America today, if you're just a casual fan and you open up the daily racing form, it is pretty apparent that 90% or more of those entrants are on Lasix. I can tell you that 90% of those horses are not suffering from EIPH. So if the only therapeutic indication is EIPH, why are all of the other competitors on Lasix? 4-hour administration is not necessarily required. There is a scientific debate about that. But the fact of the matter is, we heard the testimony from the rider expert here that obviously a lower weight horse has a performance enhancement advantage. And so why do trainers authorize third-party administration of Lasix to horses that don't have the problem? It's because it's performance enhancing. And thank you for the opportunity to participate, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you very much. Now, without, I request unanimous consent to enter the following testimony into the record. Without objection, so ordered. A letter of support from Tom V. David, DVM. A letter from Samantha Smith, the Jockey Club. A letter from the New York Racing Association. A letter from Arthur Gray. A letter from Keeneland Association, Inc. A letter from the Humane Society Veterinary Medicine Association. A letter from the U.S. Harness Racing Alumni Association. A letter from 50 horse trainers. A letter from the Homes for Horses Coalition. Statement by Representative Andy Barr. Letter from Arthur Hancock, Stone Farm President. Letter from the former chairman of the Association of Racing Commissioners International. A letter from the former president of the American Association of Equine Practitioners. A letter from Nancy L. McLean, University of Edinburgh Equine Association. A letter from R. Anthony Chamberlain, supporting member of the Water Hay Oats Alliance. A letter from Governor and Mrs. Stephen B. Bashar of Kentucky. A letter from Sid Gustafson, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. A letter from Barry Irwin, Team Valor International. A lot of interest in this. A letter from Stacy Hancock of the Water Hay Oats Alliance, managing member. A letter from Matt F. Uliano, Executive Vice President and Executive Director of the Jockey Club. A letter from Stuart Janney, Chairman of the Jockey Club. A list of the current 38 parimutuel racing jurisdictions. Letter from the West Point Thoroughbred. Letter from Travis T. Tigert, CEO of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. Letter from Vinnie Viola of St. Elias Stables, LLC, a letter from Dr. A. Gary Lavin, letter from Dr. Douglas Daniels, a letter from Keith Kruper, a letter from the Equine Health and Welfare Alliance, a letter from the National Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association, a letter from the Iowa Horsemen's Benevolent and Protection Association, David McShane, a letter from the Iowa Horsemen's Benevolent and Protection Association, John Moss, a letter from the Horsemen's of West Virginia, letter and documents from Dr. Thomas Tobin, a letter from the North American Association of Racetrack Veterinarians, a letter from the Washington National Horsemen's Benevolent and Protection Association, a letter from the American Quarter Horse Association, a letter from the Kentucky Horsemen's Benevolent and Protection Association, and finally, a letter from the Animal Welfare Institute. And now, I would like to thank our witness and the previous witnesses for their participation in today's hearing. I remind members that pursuant to committee rules, they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by the witnesses who have appeared. I ask each witness to respond as promptly as possible to any question that you may receive. And at this time, the subcommittee is adjourned.